Alrighty, let's do this. The Cult of Hockey podcast by the faithful and for the faithful. I'm David Staples of the Edmonton Journal, and I'm here today with Kurt Leavins. Welcome, Kurt.
Hey, David. Beautiful blue ocean spread out in front of me, yet here we are inside talking hockey. That just shows how dedicated we are.
Oh, Kurt, my apologies for that. That makes me feel terrible, even dragging anyone away from that for even a minute.
But
is
hey,
hard to do.
Hey, we love the Oilers, so that's why we're here. So
we do, but there is a limit to all things, and Oilers experiencing the blue sea, the sunshine. I don't know, man. I don't know, but good for you, Kurt. That's a sacrifice, and I think everyone respects that. So
that's what we signed up for.
Indeed. Kurt, the July 1st, whatever that was, is over. Frenzy, I guess. It's always called the July 1st frenzy. It always is. It kind of was a frenzy. It was a very, man, some of those contracts handed out. You could say that any year, though. But this year especially was a weird one.
It was sure a buyer's market, hey? The prices were just crazy.
There was very few sellers and lots of buyers, and everyone had a lot of money because of the cap going up. But you know what? That's not changing. The next 3 years, next year, everyone's going to have a lot more money. And the year after that, everyone's going to have a lot more money because the cap's going up about $10 million a year for the next, and the question on everybody's minds right now, are the Oilers better or worse than last season, Kurt? What say you?
I would say on a whole, I think they are either flat or marginally better. I'd say flat because really, we saw some decent NHL hockey players head out of town. We really are only seeing 2 NHL players come into town. But at the same time, I think we all agreed that this club was a little old and a little slower than it was the previous year. And I think that's marginally improved. Now, in terms of context and perspective, I don't think anybody in the Pacific Division got much better than the Oilers did. So what I'd say is it's almost addition by not spending anything. I think that Stan Bowman ultimately looked at the UFA marketplace and decided this is not a crop that I really want to invest a lot of time picking from, right? And sometimes it's not the money you spend, but the money you don't spend. And so, we certainly didn't see the rolling in of free agents like we saw last summer. In retrospect, 2020, maybe that wasn't so smart last summer. This is certainly a different approach. This is Stan Bowman's first full year on the job. This is his opportunity to put his stamp on the team. So yeah, flat, marginally better. What about you?
I'm not convinced they're better. That's for sure. I mean, they lost 6. That was a good way to frame it, Kurt. They lost 6 NHLers. Connor Brown cashed in, got a big contract in New Jersey. Corey Perry cashed in, got a big contract in Los Angeles. John Klingberg cashed in, got a big contract in Seattle. Victor Arvidsson, who it seems to me wanted out. I'm gonna, I'm just reading the tea leaves. The Oilers wanted him out, but he also wanted out. So Evander Kane and Jeff Skinner, who's yet to sign elsewhere. That's 6 NHL quality hockey players. And they brought in Mangiapane and arguably Curtis Lazar. He's been in the NHL for a while. So they brought in 2, let's say. He's equivalent to Skinner, who was a marginal NHLer too in a lot of ways last year. So heading into here's why I'm not yet prepared to say that they're better or even as good. Heading into the trade deadline, I thought they need 2 things to beat Florida. And that's beat Florida. That's the whole focus. You're climbing Mount Florida this year. You got to stick the Oilers flag on top of that sucker. And there's Sasquatches and wolves, and there's glaciers and slippery slopes. It's not easy. You need better goaltending to do that. You will need better goaltending, and you're going to need some nasty, aggressive, fast forwards to get in on Florida's defensemen and harass them, get after them in a way that the Oilers could not do and did not do in the Stanley Cup final. I think that those are the two huge needs that I at least identified. Rightly or wrongly, I could be incorrect. Open to that. But I don't think I'm not sure that they haven't addressed the goaltending need at all, essentially. I'm afraid that Mr. Tompkins is more of an AHL answer, kind of replacing Colin Delia than he is an NHL answer. And Mangiapane is a good player in that regard. He'll help on the forecheck. He's a pesky, skilled hockey player, a smart hockey player. And I think he's in terms of a replacement for Arvidsson, I think that Stan Bowman took a risk there because Arvidsson had a contract for this year from the old days, essentially, before the cap went crazy. And he was betting that he could replace Arvidsson with a player at least as good under this new system where the prices were were a lot higher and players were scarce. He got away with it. Mm-hmm. He moved out Arvidsson and brought in Mangiapane, who I think is a very adequate replacement. And it's I didn't mind Arvidsson. I thought he was a strong two-way player.
Yeah, I know.
But I think Mangiapane might be a better fit. Arvidsson wanted out, I'm guessing again. I'm reading that into things. And so that's a work that moved up. But they lost Evander Kane, a ferocious force in the playoffs. Their most intimidating hockey player. In some way, and by far, their best forechecker in terms of doling out punishment. So Trent Frederick was signed. So you could say that's another, in a way, an addition. Like he was traded for, he was already on the team though, but it was questionable whether he was a rental or whether they were going to sign him. So Frederick might be able to fill that role. But what I need to see still is one or two more signings like Curtis Lazar. I loved the Curtis Lazar signing. I think he's exactly the kind of fourth line player. Curtis Lazar has been one of the top hitting forwards in the NHL for the last 3 or 4 years. Now he's 30 and he's been injured and it's starting to take a physical toll on him, I think, playing this style of hockey. So I'm worried that he might be a little bit past his best before date in terms of playing super aggressive forechecking hockey that he needs to play to stay in the NHL, and the Oilers need to beat Florida. But he's the right idea. And what I'm hoping to see, Kurt, is at least one and maybe two more players in that same range of NHL minimum to $1 million a year signed who have that same quality, who the Oilers can create a fourth line that can get in there and get on Florida. And I'm not sure right now. So right now, the guys I see on the fourth line would be Janmark and Kapanen. And neither of them really broke through against Florida. Kapanen especially had his moments in the playoffs. Janmark honestly is starting to look. I think we both had him as, if you can get rid of him, get rid of him. So I think you're going to need to replace Matthias Janmark to beat Florida. You're going to need a younger, bigger, faster, more aggressive hockey player than Janmark was and is right now in his career. It's not there anymore. And I think Kapanen's not a bad bet though. So one or two more forwards with that kind of quality to them. And I'll say, oh yeah, I think they're at least as good as last year then. Until I see that, no. And then to be better than last year, they need another goalie. And they have yet to get that.
All interesting points. The people who listen to this podcast on a regular basis will know that you and I vary slightly on our modus operandi here. You say that we're in Panther beating mode, and I'm one of those guys who said you got to get there first. And so I'm more focused on that than you are. Be I right or be I wrong? I do like the Mangiapane signing. I don't disagree with you that he's a different version of Victor Arvidsson. But I think he has a very good chance of being a better version of Victor Arvidsson. But still a small, speedy player who plays with tenacity. And Arvidsson, when he was at the top of his game, not necessarily when he was in Edmonton, played that way too. Slight difference with Mangiapane. He is perfectly capable of being a regular penalty killer, which is something that Arvidsson didn't do when he was here. So I think there's a slight plus there. If Mangiapane plays on a line with Draisaitl, you're going to need some beef on that line, but I kind of think they're figuring that Podkolzin would be there already. Maybe Mangiapane doesn't play with Draisaitl. Maybe Matthew Savoy does, and Mangiapane's on the third line with Henrique and Frederick. I'm not sure exactly how that's going to flesh out. Chris Knobloch probably doesn't know either, and probably won't until the end of training camp. But anyway, solid ad. About $500,000 cheaper than Arvidsson, so pretty okay. I'm all right with the Curtis Lazar signing too. Like you, he's a real NHL player, good penalty killer. He's physical. He's a right-handed shot. He's more than solid in the face-off dot. And I know I've seen a few people complain that he's slow. Well, if you check NHL Edge, what he is a perfectly average NHL skater. He ain't fast, but he isn't slow yet either. I think he's a totally serviceable fourth line center. And you know, my complaint through the end of the last half of last season and the regular season, David, was for as much as I respected Matthias Janmark, he's not a center. And I thought that was one of the weaknesses that they had, was a non-center playing center in your fourth line. Right now, not only could Curtis Lazar do that for you, he's also real competition for Noah Philp. Now Noah Philp isn't just being handed that 4C job. There's going to be a battle between the two guys. And I think competition like that makes your team better. So I think for all those reasons, like you, I think the Lazar signing is a real positive. A real quick one on a couple of the other guys that they did bring in. I agree with you that Matt Tompkins he's your AHL goaltender. You can call him up in a pinch. He played okay for Team Canada at the Olympics. Solid journeyman AHL guy. Riley Stillman's a little bit better than that. You know, if you run into injuries on the left-hand side on your blue line, to call Riley Stillman up for short term and ask him to play 10, 12 minutes a night, I can think of worse. Like, that's an okay bubble signing. He's going to play in the AHL, but I'm okay if he comes up in certain situations. So, look, 3 of those 4 signings are for the NHL minimum. So when you're comparing Stan Bowman to other guys in the league, and we're gonna get to that in a minute, again, I think he was pretty wise with his pennies. He got a maybe better version of Victor Arvidsson for less, and these other 3 guys he got to flesh out the roster, they're at the league minimum. So I have a hard time, complaining about the job Stan Bowman did there.
Yeah, it's hard to know the lines, Kurt. What we know is they have the good news is this. They have a bunch of guys who can really play center. Starting with Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl and Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, Adam Henrique, Trent Frederick, Curtis Lazar, Noah Philp, and Janmark. So those are the candidates. Even Kapanen played center.
Yep. Can never have too many
candidates.
centers.
And some of them, those guys can really play center.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm increasingly open to the idea of, because he played so well as a center in the playoffs, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins may be a center this year. And you might get the best value from Ryan Nugent-Hopkins on this team as a center. He just really impressed me. He's playing with a broken hand against Florida. He was probably Edmonton's most effective 2-way hockey player in the final. You didn't see him making mistakes on a lot of goals against, for instance, and all the other top players were. It was repeated. But Nuge was really good, and both on the wing and at center in the final. So I'm increasingly open to the idea of a top line with Draisaitl and McDavid. People often make the point, many teams have their top 2 players, their best 2 players on their top line. And the Oilers haven't done it because they like splitting them up, and they haven't had necessarily other lines that work. But between Nugent-Hopkins, McDavid, Hyman, Mangiapane, Draisaitl, Matt Savoy, and Trent Frederick and Adam Henrique, Those are 8 pretty good hockey players, and Podkolzin,
Mm.
9. They have I think they can find 2 scoring lines each game out of that. And I think there's going to be, obviously, there's just a ton of blendering in the NHL, mixing and matching of players. So that's going to go on. But I just, they are really strong, after forever not being so terribly weak at center. They are I think the Athletic ranked them the strongest team at center and the strongest team on defense.
They did. And
And I think that's fair in the regular season. And Darnell Nurse is getting a tremendous amount of criticism right now. Oh, did you hear me, Kurt?
Yep.
I think we're a little frozen. Darnell Nurse is getting a tremendous amount of criticism right now, and rightfully so. This is the 3rd or 4th playoffs in a year where he's just been completely underwhelming. And people have noticed, and I really believe they can't win the Stanley Cup if that continues from Nurse. But in the regular season, Nurse last year was really good. And I'll debate anybody on that. He got the job done. He was confident. He was playing a simple game. He was taking the man. He was moving the puck. So I think Darnell Nurse needs a sports psychologist to work with him about his playoff performance as much as anything, or a new defense coach. I'm not convinced Coffey is the right coach for Nurse. I think Paul Coffey. Let's move on to this a little bit. The coaching staff changes that we're hearing about. I think, first of all, Chris Knobloch has got to be able to pick his coaches in a way he's never had the opportunity before. I think it's gotten old to have a coach on the bench who has a direct line to the owner and does it more so than the head coach. And I think that became a problem in the playoffs. Coffey's defense pairings were weak. They were responsible for losing some games, and he was too slow to respond often. And he can't bring out the best in Nurse. They've got to get a defensive coach who can do that in the playoffs. So Coffey did it in the regular season. You could say that, well, maybe it's just a matter of time before he does that in the playoffs. Time moves fast in the NHL, and they got to try something different now. And I would like to see a new coach on the bench for the Oilers when it comes to the defensemen. I think clearly Stu Skinner's regressed the last 3 seasons. His save percentage has dropped. They need a new goalie coach. And again, Dustin Schwartz may be a very good goalie coach. Paul Coffey may be a really good defenseman coach. You didn't get the results you needed in the Stanley Cup final, and you didn't get the results you needed with Nurse through the playoffs. You didn't get the results you necessarily needed from Skinner in the regular season or in the playoffs. This is 3 seasons in a row he's regressed. Or 2 seasons in a row because he started out pretty good. New goalie coach, new defense coach, and they need someone to replace Glenn Gulletson on the power play. And the power play, I thought Glenn Gulletson was fantastic in Edmonton, and on merit. Like, I wouldn't be saying this about, well, we should replace the power play coach. And the power play was good in the playoffs, but it wasn't good when they needed it in the final. And again, they failed that test. So, but I'm not making the argument you would get rid of Gulletson based on that. I think you'd bring him back, but it's maybe time, like a new coach is okay too. Like, you got to find the right person to work with these superstar hockey players. But I think they kind of know what they're doing, and it's going to be some tweaking rather than any kind of revolutionizing the power play. So I like that they're going to be the penalty kill too. Didn't get it done in the playoffs, was shaky all year. If they have wholesale changes in the coaching staff this year, other than Chris Knobloch, maybe that's merited and maybe that's a good thing. It's certainly, I think, would be a good thing for the goalie coach and probably the defense coach. How do you see it?
Well, one, obviously you have to replace your associate coach and power play coach. And so that's a natural. I think there's a real danger with wholesale changes. And I mean, other than Chris Knobloch, of course, who's clearly going to stay and will probably get an extension this summer. I think changing everybody out, that's a lot of change for a team that's been to the Stanley Cup finals in back-to-back seasons. And I think everybody and I mean everybody, is suffering from recency bias here, and they're just stuck on those last 2 games against Florida. And I get it. They stung. But look, this was the second best team in the league for 2 seasons running. I don't think we need to throw everything out and start again. So having said that, obviously you've got to replace your power play coach. That's been decided for you. I think they need a new defense coach too. I think Paul Coffey was a really good choice in the interim. In the moment when they really needed somebody, when there was a lot of uncertainty behind the bench, and you didn't know how Chris Knobloch would do, I felt he was a good choice. But it's time to move on, I think, to a younger and more progressive thinking defenseman coach who has a better handle on how to communicate with NHL players today. I think Paul Coffey's a legendary Oiler. The organization's lucky to have him, but I believe there's a better match for this defense out there, and they should go and get it. And Mr. Coffey should go back to his previous job. So that's my take.
Yeah.
Goaltending coach. Yeah, I think something has to change in goal. And because I think Stan Bowman quite rightly looked at the UFA crop out there and said, I don't see anybody out here who's better than Stuart Skinner. And I agree with him. There wasn't. So if you're going to make a goalie change, it's going to be in season. That doesn't always work out great. You'd sooner give the 2 guys that you got, who've gotten you to back-to-back Stanley Cup finals, another shot. But I don't think you can just go same old and expect a different result. So I think you've got to have a new goaltending coach. You have to do something back there to try and affect change and end up with a different outcome. Otherwise, I think you're just waiting to the deadline to see what's available.
So we're using different words, but we're agreeing. We're agreeing, Kurt. We're getting there, for different directions and different routes. But we seem to be, and I'm going to raise one thing that was raised on TSN, and I don't think I don't want to get too far into it because it's getting ahead of ourselves. But there could be a goalie that comes free this summer later on, is Carter Hart. Now he is up on very serious charges right now, and we don't know the outcome of those charges. And it could be he'll be found guilty and then he's off the books. It could be, though, that not only is he that he found not guilty, and people aren't found innocent. Everyone keeps saying that, like he's going to be. No, people are found either guilty or not guilty in our system. He may not be found not guilty, but I think the key in this whole thing for all of these players' future, including Carter Hart, is the judge's ruling. It's a judge alone trial now. The jury was relieved. So that means that the judge is going to have a written ruling. And that is what the judge says in that ruling is absolutely critical to those players. Because if there's a rather ringing, these guys actually are innocent vibe to the ruling, that makes all the difference. And I'm not saying there's going to be, but if there is, they could all be coming back to the NHL next year. If there isn't, the NHL may take action even if they're found not guilty. So Carter Hart may come up. Kevin Weeks brought him up on TSN. We'll see. That's a goalie who, I don't know if he would even come to Edmonton. It's his hometown, right? A lot of pressure, but we'll see how that develops.
Yeah.
Other than that, go ahead, Kurt.
Yeah, I have a couple thoughts on that. Obviously, it's still before the courts, and so we kind of don't know how that outcome is going to go. Like you, I suspect I've spent many years inside courtroom covering trials, so I'm kind of used to this, and I'm a firm believer. As much as people have issues with the justice system, I'm a firm believer that that you end up either being found guilty or found innocent. And if you're found guilty, right? And if you're found guilty, that's the way it bounces, right? There's a lot of folks who choose to stick a guilt label on someone, even though they have not been found guilty in court. I always struggle with that. I respect people's opinions and their feelings and their views on that. But But if this person has been cleared of wrongdoing, the justice system is set up so that person can go back and attempt to restart their life again. And that goes for whether you're up on B&E charges, stealing a car, attempted murder, or this, right? So I guess I'll step down from my soapbox fight right now, but I put a lot more faith in the courts than maybe other people do.
Preaching, Matt. You can preach. I love what you just said. I think that is one of the foundational statements of our society, is that of a free society, and you said it really well. So I appreciate that. And I
think Carter Hart, if let's say he's able to come back to the NHL, I think all 32 NHL teams should consider it, and then maybe they should set it aside for various reasons. But before all this happened, he was an average to above average NHL goaltender.
Yeah. I didn't know you had covered a lot of trials. I've done so as well. I've covered probably a dozen major murder trials, and I wrote a book on a major murder trial. And I'll tell you what, people have strong opinions on this case. And the only thing I would say is this, that unless you're in court and listening to all the evidence, you really are in a poor position to have a strong opinion that you should hold tight to.
100%.
You've got to hear all the evidence. You have got to assess the credibility of every witness, of the competing narratives, of the cross-examination, all those things, all the evidence. You've got to think about it all. If you don't do that, you really are just guessing. And you have to know that, because all kinds of people are going to have these incredibly strong opinions one way or the other on this. And they don't have the necessary information to have that kind of confidence in their opinion. Yep. So I'm really putting a lot of weight in what the judge says. And listen, having said all that, I've covered trials where I didn't agree with the verdict. There's one major trial where I thought in the end, maybe the people weren't guilty. And there was another major trial, and these are both famous murder cases, where I thought maybe that person was guilty. But based on the evidence heard in court, I will say that the judge probably made the right decision in both cases based on the evidence that was heard in court. And that's how this judge is going to be deciding. So I would just stress that for everybody. If you're gonna have an opinion on this case, read the verdict, read the ruling. At least do that. And just like the Stan Bowman thing, at least read the report on Stan Bowman's involvement in what happened before you have a strong opinion that you want to defend in public. And if you do that, we can have a discussion, but most people won't, and they'll still have strong opinions. And that's why everyone's wasting their time talking about it, because people won't even do the basic thing, which is to read the ruling before they come up with an opinion.
For what it's worth,
we have officially gotten off track.
Yeah, all right, that's okay. For what it's worth, the biggest trial I covered was Carlo Homolka's trial.
Wow. Brutal trial.
Awful trial.
I read Kirk Macon's, obviously. Yep. I have covered trials. I covered a trial so bad that I never wanted to write about murder and homicide ever again in my life after covering. It was the Nina Cordapat murder, a young girl murdered.
Know it well.
After she was abducted from West Edmonton Mall. Just horrible.
Yeah.
All right. Kurt, moving along. Those trials leave a mark on you. All right, Ken Holland. One of the most interesting things and unexpected things was the radically different behavior between the current Oilers GM and the former Oilers GM on July 1st. Now, part of it is driven by Ken Holland had a lot of money that he had to spend. He had money burning a hole in his pocket. I don't know what it was, 26 million in cap space. And Stan Bowman didn't. He just had a little amount of money. And Stan Bowman has Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl on his team, and Ken Holland doesn't. So Ken Holland has got to be a rainmaker. He's got to make things happen. There's a different pressure. He's the first year as GM of the LA Kings. But Kurt, I don't know if I've seen a more negative opinion on a GM after a July 1st, a consensus negative opinion in Los Angeles, outside Los Angeles, even people who are inclined to defend the GM in Los Angeles. And many people are inclined to defend the hometown team and the hometown coach and GM, especially a new one, someone coming in. But Holland's work just brought universal attack. What did you think of it?
Well,
maybe you'll defend it.
I want to lead by saying I'm one of those people who believes the Edmonton Oilers have been and are in a position to win the Stanley Cup today, in large part because of Ken Holland. I think Mr. Holland brought stability and credibility to this franchise when it really needed it. And I know not many people want to give Ken Holland credit for what he did here in Edmonton. I will. Having said that, I'm kind of happy that Stan Bowman decided not to throw good money at bad things. You know, my biggest criticism of the Los Angeles Kings over the last couple of seasons, and this would come up when we would preview the series coming up against the Edmonton Oilers, I would say, look, I got lots of respect for the LA Kings, but their two best players are Anze Kopitar and Drew Doughty, and they're old, right? So what does Ken Holland decide to do to overcome all that and beat the Edmonton Oilers next year? He adds more old players and pays Corey Perry twice the money he should be paid, and pays Cody Ceci, who, look, I have time for Cody Ceci, but paid him 3 times the money Cody Ceci should get. And I don't know what he was thinking with Brian Dumoulin, but good God, man. It's just, look, Ken Holland knows more about hockey. He's forgot more about hockey than I know. But so maybe he knows exactly what he's doing, and LA will ride this all the way to the Stanley Cup final. But on the face of it, this looks pretty shaky.
I'm going to work at trying to get it back here and see what happens. And see if we have any success. See if we can, if I can upload this or not. What's yours in terms of percentage uploads? Where are you at?
99%.
Yeah, the problem's at my end, and I got to figure out what's going on. I might have too many windows open. Yeah, I just think Holland is past his best before date, Kurt, and it was shown last year with the Broberg Holloway thing. To me, after that debacle, shouldn't have been hired by another team. Should have been a clear signal to other teams that Ken Holland was ready for retirement. And you should watch out. You know, LA didn't do that. And I think they're paying the price. You know, the CC contract in particular, man, he's been eaten alive. He was okay-ish in the playoffs for the Oilers in 2024. But, man, the Oilers, they really, he still could be a bottom pairing defenseman. So if a team picked him up for 2 years at a $1.5 million,
right,
that would make sense. But 4 years at $4.5 million, that shows that. And you already have a slow defense with Joel Edmondson, and you've brought in Brian Dumoulin, who's not super fast anymore. So you're already struggling with a slow defense. And you now have Cody Ceci on top of that. Plus you brought in Corey Perry, who's an older player. Plus who else did they bring in? They brought in Joel Armia,
Brian
who's
Dumoulin.
32. And Dumoulin. Yeah, it was just like, what are you doing? You know, Pia Suter, who's 28 or 29, just signed for 2 years, $4 million in St. Louis. That's the deal you want to make, Ken Holland. You know, shore up your forwards.
Yeah.
And don't trade Jordan Spence, your good young puck-moving defenseman, in favor of a Cody Ceci, who could help you as a bottom pairing. But if you're playing him in the top, you're paying him to play in the top 4 now. I don't know what they're up to there. And I'm glad, because they're the Oilers' opponent, and I'm not wishing them well. But that didn't go well for Ken Holland at all.
I think the NHL Guide and Record Book was all fine and good in 2002, but it's 2025.
Yes. Yeah. He did a lot of good work for the Oilers, Kurt. So I Thanks for saying that. And, traded for Matthias Ekholm, gave second chances to Corey Perry and Evander Kane, and they made good on those second chances, those two players. He was open to that, and he did that, and that was signed Zach Hyman. He made some mistakes. He signed Jack Campbell. Didn't work out. They made a bet on a goalie that was probably an ill-advised bet from the start. But again, they needed a goalie. They were desperate for a goalie. And sometimes it's best. Stan Bowman is being called a loser in a lot of the judgments on the July 1st, 2025. The Oilers are in the loser category. I do not buy it at all. Man, if it's not there, don't force it. And and I know I made a critique earlier. They didn't get a goalie. They're yet to get some of what they need, but they got part of what they needed. And being a good GM is just patience is because a bad contract kills you. It can kill your Stanley Cup hopes. And if you want to know one thing about Florida, Kurt, the difference between the Oilers and Florida, they didn't have any bad contracts. The Oilers still had Jack Campbell contract hanging over their head. Florida, I don't think, has any bad contracts. Not one. That's how you win the Stanley Cup. So Stan Bowman,
they have a lot of good ones.
Yeah, and they've got a lot of good ones. So you need some really good ones, and the Oilers have those too. But Nurse is an overpay, at least on playoff performance. And Jack Campbell was a disaster in Edmonton. So the Oilers have one iffy contract in Nurse and one terrible one in Campbell. Go ahead.
So at the Cult of Hockey, we give out player grades every game between 1 and 10 based on performance. Yeah. So if you were to grade Stan Bowman on his performance, since game 6 of the Stanley Cup playoffs, what would it be out of 10?
Well, knowing what I know about the market and looking at the goaltender market, I'd give him an 8, Kurt. Like I think he did great. He didn't make the fatal flaw that kills teams, which is hope contracts. Like we attack the players for hope passes into the slot that lead to turnovers and 3-on-2 rushes against. He didn't give the hope contract. Thank goodness for that. And
I would have given him a 7. So you and I weren't very far apart.
The Trent Frederick contract. I mean, if Trent Frederick had gone to free agency, he would have got $1 million more a year, maybe over that term. Yeah, maybe over that term as well. Over the shorter term, for sure. But even over 8 years, there might have been some teams. So I think the Frederick contract is defensible and makes sense and is a decent bet. Maybe not a great bet, but it's a decent bet. And the Mangiapane contract's really good, and Lazar is good. And I want to see a few more small signings but I fully expect them. I think we're going to see there was a play that Tampa made last night. I just put on my thing. I'd like to see the Oilers bring in a player called Jacob Pelche, who was a top pick of the Flames. He's a smaller guy, but Kurt, he had one of the highest, when you look at highest rates of hits and highest rate of scoring at even strength last year, Pelche was in the top 50 in the NHL. Now, this is small amount of minutes, but it's a small bet, 3 years at the minimum contract. That was a brilliant contract from Tampa. Those are the contracts that you make a lot of those bets, and you identify the players who in the time that they had put up points and put up hits if you're looking for aggressive forwards with a bit of skill. And they did that. So that's the kind of bet I want to see. There's still more of those players out there. Go for it. Go ahead, Kurt.
To your point on contracts with Mangiapane, it's only 2 years. That's all it should have been.
Yeah.
Right? So A, that's smart. But 2, when you look at the structure of the contract, the no move clause basically falls away in year 2. He's much easier to deal if it doesn't work out. And they did the same thing with Trent Frederick. Everybody was up in arms about the no move clause, but if you look at the way Stan structured that contract as it moves on, after 4 years, it's not hard to move him. And as we learned from Victor Arvidsson, if a player wants to leave, it's the no move contract almost doesn't exist, right? So I think some people overblow that. So
yeah. All right, Kurt, let's leave it there. Let's hope this uploads. I don't know if this is still on live on Twitter or what. It says it is, but thanks for talking, Kurt.
Anytime. My pleasure.
And in the meantime, and in between time, this has been another edition of the Cult of Hockey podcast.